These files were never meant to be public, but someone reopened them. This is the Dark Bureau. In the stately corridors of Washington, D.C., lobbyists for big tech are a known quantity. Their presence is codified in public filings, their official alliances subject to soft scrutiny at congressional hearings and in think tank reports. Yet just beyond the visible layer, an uncharted realm of influence thrives. A cold and calculated perimeter where Fortune 1000 corporations deploy silent fixers, surrogates, and orchestrators of global power. Here, in the back channels, multi-billion-dollar interests redraw the lines of governance. They operate not through transparency, but opacity, not through public persuasion, but through networks invisible by design. What looks like the familiar machinery of democracy, the crafting of new rules, the debate of policy, conceals a deeper choreography, choreographed by entities few outsiders can ever name. Beneath the surface, a complex ecosystem hums with activity. Internal documents, some classified and others quietly filed away beyond routine discovery, expose a system not of simple persuasion, but sophisticated, adaptive opposition. The architects of this machinery seldom appear in public registers. They establish fictitious firms registered to empty suites, create advocacy collectives with purposefully vague missions, and contract technical voices that seem independent, but are, in fact, operating from the same playbook. When oversight bodies uncover one scheme, another quietly emerges. A new foundation, a new address, a new cause that is nominally public, but materializes only at moments of regulatory interest. This is not a matter of a few bad actors. What is revealed is a sprawling apparatus engineered to sidestep constraints and perpetuate itself across jurisdictions and generations. In the heart of Brussels, as a digital markets bill is introduced, a sudden groundswell of petitions, op-eds, and grassroots campaigns appears. The signatories seem diverse, a mosaic of small businesses, consumer advocates, local academic voices. Yet meticulous tracing uncovers a pattern. Nearly every campaign can be linked to a core set of American and British reputation firms, well known in industry, but rarely in government oversight databases. Bank statements show the flows. Money streams through legal trusts, often spanning multiple time zones before surfacing in regional budgets. Analyst reports originating in Boston find themselves cited in South Asian news columns. Think tank events in Paris showcase data sets quietly produced by subsidiaries of Silicon Valley titans. Regulatory officials face an avalanche of tailored argumentation, formatted to seem independent, but rehearsed far from public view. The effect is to not just resist rules, but proactively reframe what is seen as legitimate debate. The stakes of this stealth influence campaign are immense. On paper, regulators attempt to serve the public interest, enforcing competition, protecting privacy, and preserving transparency. Yet those tasked with shaping these policies often find that the information ecosystem is pre-populated with narratives and data demonstrably favourable to industry. Phrases like innovation at risk, the future of digital freedom, and jobs and economic opportunity echo in regulatory filings and legislative sessions. These are not spontaneous or merely popular talking points. They are the result of iterative focus grouping and narrative testing by communication strategists. Few governmental actors realise the depth of this playbook, nor how comprehensively it has been woven into the fabric of transatlantic policy debate. Each layer peeled back prompts the same realisation. For nearly every visible act of advocacy, there is a mirrored intervention staged out of sight. A Silicon Valley mainstay seeds a non-profit in Brussels that quietly lobbies against data localization. The non-profit in turn commissions a research paper by a London consultancy, which is referenced days later in a major Indian daily. The network is supported by a patchwork of legal entities, some with names echoing civic virtue, all with directors who appear nowhere else in corporate records. When disclosures are mandated, the supporting documentation is heavily redacted. Regulatory hearings in Europe unveil vast mosaics of predictions about competitive harms, few of which survive scrutiny once the financial entanglements are revealed. When reporters track source material, addresses are traced to rented mailboxes housing dozens of similarly structured groups. While the web evokes espionage, it is not illegal. The techniques are tolerated and sometimes even lauded under the banner of creative advocacy. Policymakers are invited to roundtables, press dinners, and closed-door briefings where lines blur between expertise and self-interest. The rationale provided is efficiency, that rapid innovation cannot wait for the slow pace of government. But the net result is a subtle shifting of the Overton window, compressing the bounds of acceptable discussion so that regulatory proposals arrive already trimmed to fit industry's interest. Years of regulatory drafts, running to thousands of pages, are cross-referenced with technical terminology introduced by these behind-the-scenes experts. What disappears from those drafts rarely captures public attention, but always favours the status quo, preserving market power and, by extension, revenues stretching into the hundreds of billions. Tensions reach a head during moments of crisis. In 2021, a cache of leaked files disclosed a sprawling network of policy institutes on 2 continents, each funded anonymously, all publishing white papers skewed toward deregulation. Around the same time, privacy amendments drafted in the language of technical necessity entered the legislative process in Brussels and Washington. Watchdogs looking for clear-cut violations are met with legal firewalls and denied access to ultimate funders. The web is shielded by legal privilege and the deliberate use of neutral, off-the-shelf service providers. It is only through post hoc investigative work, often by journalists and NGOs, that the shape of the system comes into focus. Payment flows can be mapped through a daisy chain of LLCs in Delaware, Zurich holding companies, Singapore-based consultancies. Law firms prepare for every line of inquiry, while specialised crisis communication teams are activated in anticipation of unwanted scrutiny. The whole system behaves not as a loose network of opportunists, but as a disciplined, resilient structure, carefully adapting under pressure. What stands out is the institutional depth of this orchestration. Fixers act not only as advocates, but as strategic risk managers, adapting playbooks in response to legislative hazards and negative press cycles. When one venue becomes hostile, perhaps a commission chair is replaced by a reformer, resources flow through alternate channels. If the main regulatory threat is public, fixers sponsor academic conferences and fund datasets that shift debate toward less controversial terrain. Should regulators focus on individual companies, positive storytelling campaigns reposition these corporations as indispensable pillars of education, public health, or environmental progress. This isn't improvisation. The tactics are formalised, updated quarterly at global strategy summits, and integrated into the internal policy capabilities of each major tech conglomerate. Yet even in a system designed for deniability, leaks occur. A whistleblower inside a reputation management agency reveals confidential playbooks laying out step-by-step guidance for neutralising investigative reporters, repurposing civil society workshops and appearing to empower critics in order to better co-opt them. Government investigation panels are assembled, but progress stalls against jurisdictional limits and the strict legality of the shell networks. Political commissions produce lengthy reports, but ultimately conclude that while the techniques are damaging to the spirit of transparent governance, they do not qualify as statutory violations. Still, the incident forces the machinery into the open, if only for a moment. It surfaces the true scale: 9 national legislatures, hundreds of parallel campaigns, influence budgets for multinational tech firms rising by double digits across every quarter. As exposure grows, fixers do not retrench. Instead, they deploy new models, broader coalitions, more technically cloaked arguments, Satellite campaigns seeded in jurisdictions previously out of reach. A key paradox surfaces. Many states, facing technology's complexity and velocity, have become institutionally dependent on industry expertise. Legislators and regulators, under pressure to balance innovation with risk, turn to those same consultancy and think tank networks for intelligence and benchmarking data. In closed parliamentary sessions, expert reports, prepared by outside advisors with undisclosed links to tech funding, are submitted as neutral evidence. Policy working groups, especially in smaller countries, sometimes lack the resources to challenge industry-supplied analysis. This creates a circular loop. Regulation is informed by data already filtered by interested parties, ensuring that final drafts rarely present more than superficial obstacles to tech's strategic goals. What appears as robust deliberation is often pre-scripted contest. The truism of democratic oversight becomes a ritual, concealing a deeper orchestration of outcomes already agreed behind closed doors. The institutional response so far has proven fragmented and reactive. Some national agencies have assembled permanent task forces to monitor informal lobbying, scrutinise trust fund flows, and require more granular disclosure of advocacy work. The European Commission, in particular, has advanced mandates forcing public reporting of intermediaries who contact lawmakers on behalf of clients. Yet for every loophole closed, the shadow networks innovate, launching unaffiliated research consortia, recruiting former regulators as beneficiaries, shifting advocacy to friendly third countries. Legal reforms and transparency efforts often chase a system designed to move faster and split accountability across a web of actors. Efforts to establish beneficial ownership registries are stonewalled by the complexity of cross-jurisdictional legal shields and non-cooperative territories. In convening global forums on regulatory integrity, policymakers increasingly acknowledge that the threat is not isolated misbehaviour, but a systemic undermining of oversight itself. The consequences for democratic governance are profound. Regulatory capture becomes more than a theoretical risk. It manifests as public hearings with predetermined outcomes, market-shaping rules emerging with barely a line altered, and watchdog inquiries that chase shadows. Civil society organisations, frequently reliant on donations and grants, can find themselves unintentionally echoing narratives originated by corporate strategists. Academic research, commissioned to inform public debate, may be subtly guided by grant conditions, with dissenting voices marginalised or presented as fringe. This splintering of accountability, where no single player can be clearly blamed, dilutes the very notion of public interest. Meanwhile, consumer trust erodes not through scandal, but through a slow, silent recalibration of expectation. As the most effective regulatory interventions vanish before enactment, the machinery's true reach is visible only in hindsight, through postmortems conducted by investigative committees and activist journalists. The public, for its part, is left buffered from the true shape of these battles. Media coverage often relies on official sources, unaware that those sources' information is the outcome of months of narrative engineering. Even educated observers in the tech policy community admit that only fragments of the influence system are ever visible at a time. The missing voices, startup founders outside the main networks, marginalised digital rights activists, sceptical academics, are often excluded from curated debates. Regulatory processes presented as technical and neutral are in practice the product of exhaustive pre-litigation and issue management. Public consultation forums, which seem participatory, are typically stage-managed events where questions have already been anticipated and alternatives narrowly scoped. This is the genius and the tragedy of the fixers system, its long-game orientation, its focus on infrastructure rather than momentary wins. Individual lobbyists cycle through every election season, but the network persists. evolving as new laws arise. Budgets for influence operations quietly increase, not for splashy ad campaigns, but for deeper investments in lasting alliances, shadow advocacy groups here, university partnerships there, legal teams able to fragment accountability across dozens of state and corporate actors. The end result is a sort of moving target. Each time accountability is enforced through whistleblowing, legislation, or audit, the networks simply adapt. The sum of these incremental shifts is a regulatory environment where reforms are watered down, public trust is corroded, and the moment of true reckoning creeps ever further into the distance. Tonight, the machinery remains undisturbed, more diffuse, more sophisticated, always anticipating the next oversight threat. Each time legislation is drafted, a new counter-campaign has already begun. Validators rehearse their talking points. Evidence packets are staged in advance for delivery to key committee members. The pace of adaptation continues to accelerate, forging a sense of inevitability about the system itself. The central question, now sharpened by years of reporting and institutional inquiry, is not whether Silicon Valley strategies exceed what can be regulated, but how much longer the globe-spanning fixes can evade meaningful accountability. Only when their entire structure, financial, institutional, and narrative, can be mapped and comprehensively dealt with, will the public finally have a chance to restore legitimate oversight to the technologies that increasingly shape our world.